Hello, this is Dr. Blackman. We're going to go over this heart model for anatomy and physiology. Of course, I always refer to the lab student handouts because that's what you guys are responsible for when it comes to your quizzes and your practicals. So I'm actually following along as you guys are. The heart, as you know, has 4 chambers. Okay? This is the right atrium here, and this is the left atrium here. As you remember, the atria, which is atrium plural, they are the collecting chambers of the heart. Down here, these much larger chambers, there's the right ventricle, and then here's the left ventricle. And if you remember, those two are the pumping chambers of the heart. Okay. When we talk about the chambers also, we often refer to the auricles. So this is the right auricle, and this is the left auricle. Those are sort of appendages that are sort of coming off of the atria that allow more blood to collect in the heart during certain situations where the heart needs more blood. Okay. Let's go over some of the blood vessels here. So another thing that's important to know too, when the heart is lying like this, you need to know which one is anterior facing you and which one is posterior facing away. So this would be the anterior portion, okay, and this is the posterior portion. And obviously superior up here, inferior down here, okay. So let's go over some of the blood vessels here. Here's the aorta. Right? There's a lot of ways you could refer to that. You could say that it's the ascending aorta since it's going up. You could call it the aortic arch. You could call this part, when it starts to go down, you could call that the descending aorta. Okay. You do need to know the branches off the aorta. So here would be the brachiocephalic trunk. You can also call that the brachiocephalic artery. Okay. This is the left common carotid artery, and if you recall, when there's a common, it's usually going to break off into an internal and an external. So that left common carotid artery is going to break off into the left external carotid artery and the left internal carotid artery. Okay, this last one here is the left subclavian artery that goes to the left arm. Okay. This blood vessel here that's coming from the right ventricle, right? That's the pulmonary trunk, okay? It's going to take deoxygenated blood to the lungs, and you can see that pulmonary trunk there is going to divide into a left pulmonary artery here that's going to go to the left lung, okay? And a right pulmonary artery here that's going to go to the right lung, okay? Now this is a good example of an artery that's not red, right? We think of arteries as being red because they're oxygenated and veins as being blue because they're deoxygenated. But remember, that's not the definition. An artery goes away from the heart, a vein goes towards the heart. It doesn't matter whether it's oxygenated or deoxygenated, okay? And a good example of that too, these blood vessels here, right? These 2 blood vessels that send blood, in this case from the left lung to the left atrium, those are the left pulmonary veins, right? So it's oxygenated blood even though it's a vein, okay? And that would make these the right pulmonary veins, okay? The other blood vessels that we're responsible for, the coronary arteries that feed the heart itself, mostly the myocardium, right? You'll see those here, right? Here's the right coronary artery, and there's the left coronary artery. They're kind of hard to see because they're obscured by some of these larger blood vessels, okay? And if we put this back on, we can kind of see it better there, right? There's the right coronary artery again, and there's the left coronary artery. It has a lot of branches, right? The only branches that you're responsible for, right? Right coronary artery, left coronary artery, and then this branch here, That's going to be your anterior interventricular branch of the coronary artery, right? And the reason it's called that is because it is between the right ventricle and the left ventricle. So that's where the interventricular portion of that comes from, okay? If you flip it over, there's the posterior interventricular branch of those coronary arteries, okay? So you can either call that the anterior interventricular branch or the anterior interventricular artery. And same here, you can say the posterior interventricular branch or posterior interventricular artery. Right. I'm referring to red here and red here, okay? I think the last blood vessel that we're going to talk about is this guy right here. It's really not a blood vessel, it's an opening of a blood vessel, and that's the opening of the coronary sinus. So deoxygenated blood in the heart is going to collect in the coronary sinus, and then it's going to dump into the right atrium right there, okay? A lot of students will say that that's the sinoatrial node, the SA node, which is the natural pacemaker of the heart. It's not that, okay? It's the opening of the coronary sinus, so don't get that confused, okay? And actually there's two other blood vessels that also return their blood to the right atrium. That's this big guy right here, right? That's the superior vena cava. That's returning deoxygenated blood to the right atrium from the structures superior to the diaphragm, okay? Then this blood vessel here is returning deoxygenated blood from structures below the diaphragm, okay? So superior vena cava, inferior vena cava, okay? So I do believe that's all the blood vessels now. Let's go over the heart valves, right? We know that valves are positioned strategically to prevent the backflow of blood, okay? So on the left side of the heart that separates left atrium here from left ventricle, right? That's the mitral valve, okay? The other name for that is the bicuspid valve. And it's called that. Bi means two, right? It has two cusps. So it's the bicuspid valve, okay? A lot of people in medicine say mitral valve, not bicuspid valve, but technically they're both correct, okay? Over here, separating the right atrium from the right ventricle, that is the tricuspid valve, okay? So it's gonna have three cusps, or leaflets is another way of saying cusps, okay? This valve here, right? If we know this is the aorta, hopefully it makes sense that that is the aortic valve, okay? That prevents blood that's in the aorta from going backwards back into this left ventricle, okay? And then the last valve here, right? Again, if you know this is the pulmonary trunk, right? That's the pulmonary valve, okay? Some people call that the pulmonic valve, is another way of referring to that, okay? You also need to know the types of valves that these are. So if it separates an atrium from a ventricle, okay, it's an atrioventricular valve, or an AV valve. So an example of that is here, the mitral valve, the tricuspid valve. Those are both atrioventricular valves, okay? These two guys here, the aortic and the pulmonary valves, right, they separate a ventricle from a blood vessel, so they are called semilunar, or SL valves, okay? A couple other structures that you need to know on here. This structure here that separates the right ventricle from the left ventricle, that's called the interventricular septum. A septum divides just like it does in the nasal cavity. Right, so interventricular septum, you can see that is very thick, lots of cardiac muscle fibers there in the myocardium, okay? These structures here, there's one there, right? There's one there, there's one there. Those are called the papillary muscles, okay? Papilla in Latin or Greek, its derivative is finger or nipple. So somebody looked at that and said that that's sort of like a nipple-like or finger-like projection going into both of the ventricles. So those are papillary muscles again. So there's a good example right there of a papillary muscle. Okay, and the papillary muscles are connected to the valves by these structures here, which are the chordae tendineae. Okay, kind of a lot of letters there in those two words, chordae tendineae. It translates to tendon-like cords. Right, so there's another example of the chordae tendineae. Okay, and again, those chordae tendineae allow the papillary muscles to connect to the atrioventricular valves. Okay, I think that's most everything. A couple landmarks, right, that are important. This is the apex of the heart, right? The inferior portion here, the apex of the heart. Sort of because if you think of the heart as being somewhat triangular shaped, right? The apex of that triangle is here. Okay, so that's the apex of the heart. And then up here where all these large blood vessels are, that's the base of the heart. Okay, so apex, base. Okay, let me make sure that we covered everything in our lab student handout. And it looks like that we have. So we're going to say that's a success. Okay, and hopefully that helps you. And good luck on your practicals, guys.